Good morning and afternoon to everyone joining us today. My name is Lindsay Lamb, and I am on the marketing team here at Pharos. Today's presenter, with his webcam and all, is Cal Curtice, the Director of Product Management at Pharos. And for the next 45 minutes, he will explore how the printing landscape was changing and how that change is being accelerated due to the global pandemic, our vision for modern print services, and the benefits of implementing a zero infrastructure print solution. If any questions come to mind while Cal is taking you through today's content, please type them into the chat box on your GoToWebinar panel, and he will address those at the end. For questions you submit that we don't get a chance to answer live, we will make sure to answer those within our follow-up email to you after the webinar. And within that follow-up email, we will also have a link to the recording as soon as it's available. So with that, I am going to hand it off to Cal, who has his webcam on and does appear to have a bathtub in the background. So this is already an interesting event. Take it away, Cal.
Well, thank you, Lindsay, and I promise not to do the seminar from the bathtub. I am in my my finished attic, which is also my mother-in-law's apartment. So these are strange times, and I hope everyone is staying healthy and finding balance between family and work. And that's part of the reason we're here today, is that we are in unprecedented times. You may be able to tell on the webcam that I have gray hair. So I've been around a little while and know that I've never seen anything like this. People in my life have never seen anything like this. So there's a lot going on, and so we've been kind of looking at how the world is changing and trying to align our strategy at Pharos and what we know from our customers with what we know about the new world that we live in and that is emerging. And I often think about these things in terms of metaphors or stories. And I thought I would start with one. Oops, a little delay there. We are in Rochester, New York, here in upstate New York, and just a few hours away is the Adirondack Park. And many of us go up there for summer vacations. It's a beautiful place. And I read a very interesting book about the park a few years ago. And it was about a couple of explorers that were the first to go into the park. And when they entered, it's a real massive area of wilderness. And there, of course, is no GPS. There's no map. There's really not a lot of information about how to get through the park. And so they were going through it, trying to map it. And in the story, they would set out a destination that they were going to get to. And as they went along the path, they would run into bogs or morasses that were very common in the Adirondack Park. And these bogs are very difficult to cross. So they would skirt around the edge looking for a way through. But oftentimes they had to actually take their stuff through one of these bogs because there was no other reasonable way with these cliffs. And so it was a very methodical process. It was putting a stone in front of you, putting a foot on the stone, picking up the stone behind you, putting it in front of you, or having a log. But I thought of this in the context of a quote that's been used a lot during this pandemic, and it was a favorite quote of our former governor, Mario Cuomo, not the current governor, who said, "You cross a morass by going stone by stone. You don't try and figure out what's on the other end because you don't know. So you're taking one step of it at a time." And I thought that concept of uncertainty and an unknowable future is really one of the core things that we've heard from our customer base. And one of them in a call last week said, anyone that tells you they know where this is going and what the world will look like in 12 months is lying to you. There's just a tremendous amount of uncertainty. And so in terms of that kind of metaphor, I was thinking about how do we know what to do next? And I think initially the way this all started was a real strong focus on safety and health. And these kind of shelter-in-place protocols kept us all apart. And we were working, as we are today, with a couple of hundred people on a call, each from their own little node in the world. And so that was kind of the very first step. And now we're starting to see this next phase of how do we return to work? How do we provide for people? How do we ensure that the economy keeps going? And so we have these phased return to work initiatives and that we're going through. And it's really about defining what's the next most essential thing that we have to do. Who has to be in the office? What is their job? And then a little bit further out, let's say on the other side of the bog is what does the new normal look like when this is over? And I think another common theme that we hear is that there's this dramatic change that took place to keep everybody safe. Then there's this, how do we figure out this next phase? And that when we finally come out of this, and we will, of course, it won't be like 2019. So we're not going backwards into the future, as they say. We're going to be in a new place that didn't exist previously. And those are, at least at a high level, the sentiment that we've heard from the market and that we see ourselves. And so we've been working on defining whether or not this new reality is aligned with where we see our customers going and where our products are going. And so that's what I wanted to share today, is kind of what we're doing and what we see on how the next 12 to 24 months plays out in terms of our little piece of the world in printing and infrastructure. And I did just want to make a quick comment about Pharos as a culture. We are a certified B Corporation, and so when we look at these things, we always look them, of course, to make the business healthy. We want, of course, a very healthy business for ourselves and so that we can do good. So certified B corporations are legally required to consider the impact of what they do on the community, on workers, and our CEO, Kevin Picard, it starts with him all through our organization. When this happened, step one, of course, is how do we keep Pharos employees healthy? But at the exact same time, it was how can we be of service to our community and to our customers? And so we view what I'm about to share as really a partnership with you guys, with our customers, in terms of what is it that we can do in order to provide a better experience for print and print infrastructure and infrastructure services. So that first stone, the one you lay down as a first step, one of the things that we know in this return to work phased approach is common surfaces present a risk for virus spread. The picture on the right almost looks old-fashioned now. And we heard very early on, how can I allow my employees or my customers to print when they return without having to share surfaces? So, there's a couple of ways you can do that. You can have a disinfectant kind of process that you go through, which is of course going to be part of it. But the other is just to reduce the number of places that people touch. And so this concept of touchless printing really is one of the first very quick initiatives that we went after in order to provide that experience for our customers. And we looked at it across all three of our major products, Beacon, of course, the cloud platform, Uniprint, and Blueprint. So I just wanted to share with you guys a couple of approaches we're taking for this first step of touchless printing. And in Pharos Beacon, we have a mobile release capability that allows users to enroll their mobile device into the secure print workflow. And then administrators can secure a device with a unique QR code. And then when a user walks up with this enrolled mobile device and scans the QR code, we're essentially associating that user with that device, and their job comes out of that printer without ever touching anything. And so this allows them to submit jobs from a mobile app, to submit jobs from a workstation, walk over to a printer that has been secured this way, and release the job. Another nice benefit of this is that there's no interface with the firmware or the device. It's a very simple securing of the device through this kind of unique identifier. And this is something that we've seen customers already using and interested in, and being able to allow employees to print without touching any of the printing equipment. We're extending that in the next several weeks here to include releasing without touch with a proximity card. We know many customers use proximity cards as a form of authentication or identification. And so the way that will work is you can turn a switch on saying, I would like a touchless workflow. And the administrator sets that, and when users tap their card or authenticate, they're presented a screen where they can opt into a touch experience to do things like scanning. But if they wait just a couple of seconds, their print jobs will come out without ever having to touch the equipment. And so these are, two approaches that we will have, one today, the other one coming very soon in the month of June, probably late in June, early July, that will be available in Pharos Beacon. In Uniprint, we have our Print Center experience today that allows users to interface with a web browser, whether it be on their mobile device or a desktop, An administrator can make a set of devices available for output, and then users, once those are available, can, for example, have a mobile device, walk up to a printer, select the job, and output to the printer they're next to, and that job would be produced without ever touching the equipment. And we're planning an increment to that in order to add this mobile release experience where the user can then absolutely identify that they're physically next to the device that they're submitting the job to and release it. So this is an example of one of the strategies we've had for quite some time, and making sure that we take technology that's been built in any of our products and making them available across the products. So we're really leveraging some of the technology that we've built in the Beacon platform into Uniprint in order to enable this. This is, we're planning on having this sometime in the summer, the incremental mobile release, but have obviously the Print Center ability today as an administrative switch to turn device selection on for output. And then Blueprint, really just a variant of those as well. Print Center experience that I just described for Uniprint, also available in Blueprint. And then there's a couple of increments to the Touchless Card release. One where you authenticate, all your jobs come out. Similarly, we'll be adding the ability to opt into the touch experience for things like scanning and glass activity. So a similar approach on all of these, but these are really the first step that we're quickly implementing to provide this return to work safety component in this new world. These are things that we would not have done if you had asked us in February, and that we're now doing very quickly. And we think, and we've heard that this type of approach is something that would benefit organizations trying to prevent spread of the virus in this return to work regime. Beyond that, now I wanted to kind of focus on the core strategy that we had going into this COVID-19. And what we did is we said, let's hypothesize, like any scientific process, let's create a hypothesis. This is back in early April, of where we think this will go from what we hear from customers, what we hear from the market, and then test that hypothesis and see if it still applies to our strategy and what we can deliver for our customers. And two key things came out of that. One is this idea that the workforce will be more distributed. Work from home approaches will remain or be sustained in many organizations to some extent. Mobile workforce, these were things that were happening that we believe are now being accelerated because of need. And then the externalization and secure workflows of IT, essentially IT infrastructure. So this move to externalize as much infrastructure as possible, convert to digital workflows, and make sure in that new environment that everything is secure, the data is flowing in and out of the organization securely. And certainly we've heard from customers, as you had remote workers, people working from home, the sudden dramatic effect really highlighted that this is a very nice architecture for flexibility and for the future. And the last point on that is the idea of abstracting complexity for people who print or people who use these systems. So they're very easy to use, and they don't result in essentially support tickets and an extensive number of support in order to switch over. So these two kind of central hypotheses were ones that we put in place as kind of primary, I guess, accelerated types of capabilities that we saw. And then, of course, there have been a bunch of organizations who collect this information and that do surveys on it. So one on the left here is Circa is an organization kind of focused in our space. And in a survey they did in April 2020, almost 90% of organizations see this time as a time to invest in digital solutions in order to prepare for that new world. The other thing we hear, and this is, I'm sure I've ever seen this reported, is this working from home will probably never return to the full working from the office. And many large organizations, including financial services, technology companies, are either extending through 2021 or saying we may never go back, including one that specifically that said 30% of their workforce will not return to an office. And much of this is, of course, linked to leases, when the leases expire, and cost savings. So this is accelerating an already started trend, we believe. And then the last one we're going to talk a little bit more about from NextGov, which is an organization that looks at technology and government institutions, and they're saying that this will accelerate the move to zero trust architecture, something that is central to our strategy, and we also see accelerating. So these are somewhere between, let's say, the second and third rock stone in our cross of the unknown here, in trying to prototype out or hypothesize where this is all headed. One other one from Key Point Intelligence from Jamie B. Sales, which you have to admit is a great name, saying that the pandemic will hasten or accelerate this migration to zero infrastructure and zero trust network, and actually pointed Pharos out along with Lexmark as organizations who had already been investing in this strategy. And so these are kind of a combination from a series of dozens of conversations we've had with our customers, kind of research into what marketing organizations and organizations collecting information are saying. So the slides that I'm showing now really represent our core strategy in many ways, and what we believe still to be in line with the accelerated change of these same things, actually. So three components that we see coming together to drive the future, and they're interrelated. The first is the desire to buy software as a service. So as opposed to buying software that you have to update and manage, you buy it typically in a true cloud metered format where you're paying every month and you don't have to worry about the heavy lift of upgrading and maintaining and all those things. And that's our core focus in the Beacon platform, to do that, but we're also extending that same type of approach to our other products. The second is externalizing the infrastructure, which we kind of touched on. This continues to grow prior to COVID-19 and is accelerating now. So the idea of taking this heavy footprint of infrastructure and moving it off of a physical presence into the cloud. And then the last is the idea that every component within a company's workflow should not trust other components. So this zero trust security model is a model that really helps that distributed workforce and this externalization of infrastructure. And I'll touch on that a little bit more. Certainly I've heard a lot about zero trust security in the context of the changing world here. So just to kind of zero in on those two, and I didn't even practice that, that came natural. On the zero trust security, there's a significant number of organizations looking at this, and I'm sure many of you on the call are as well. So in the traditional perimeter security with firewall, the castle and moat approach, in many ways is tied to the idea of a location, that you're going to build this castle and put a moat around it, and anything inside that castle should be trusted. Zero trust really kind of breaks that castle down and says there's going to be people scattered all over the place, and every point within our workflow needs to assume no trust. So the communication between those points have to be verified through a series of protocols. And when you think of print, that's essentially, I print a job, it's held somewhere, and then that job's coming down to a printer. None of those exchanges should be trusted as something that's protected within a firewall to have a zero trust security model. And then zero infrastructure in the context of print, typically is the administrative tools, the print servers, the print drivers, all of those things are essentially externalized and delivered in a different way. And so these two really are where we saw the market going even a few years ago, and we started out building and have now available in Beacon, and think this actually represents where we're accelerating into this hypothetical new world on the other side of the epidemic. Excuse me. So one of the issues related to this zero infrastructure, zero trust, is those types of architectures don't work with printing typically. So if you read about what will it take to implement a zero trust environment at an organization, where you get into challenges are legacy workflows. And in many cases, printing is kind of a legacy workflow in the sense that it wasn't architected yet really to operate in these kind of more advanced environments. And so they break. So you're kind of forced to continue with your printing workflow in a more traditional architecture, and trying to plan for these newer these newer models is difficult, and that's something that we set out to solve. So in a typical architecture today, a printer would have to talk to a local component, and there's a bunch of challenges moving into this world. However, as I said, we invested in this. We've partnered with some of the manufacturers to build a way in which the print devices could work in a zero trust architecture. So if you look at the left, this is that kind of castle and moat approach, which says I'm going to protect a whole set of assets and assume that they can all be trusted. The problem with that, and I have a slide on this, is that if you get through that firewall and you're inside the castle, you can wreak havoc. So from a security standpoint, it reduces your ability to be distributed, and it increases the risk of attack once someone's inside. Whereas a zero trust architecture eliminates that approach and says, we're going to deal with every point within in our workflow or business process as a point that needs to validate that it is capable of doing something and what that thing is. And so in that particular case, any breach, for example, would be at one point and not within the entire environment. And that's one of the key things. The other part that you can see is that it allows for distributed endpoints. They can essentially be anywhere. In the context of printing, a printer could be in a remote office and be part of a zero trust architecture that doesn't have that traditional IT framework. So this is really a big driver from customers we've talked to is around the security model. I think everyone's aware of how much cost there is involved in a security breach and how many trillions of dollars every year are spent in fighting security breaches. And so this move towards a zero trust architecture is accelerating as a result of this distributed workforce and the vulnerability of traditional firewall type perimeter security. And so these trusted relationships and this communication between endpoints is something we believe is being adopted quickly and will become part of the future as a standard security model. And so to drill in a little bit on those two conceptual ideas of zero trust and zero infrastructure, I wanted to share now some of the kind of core components that are required to be changed in order to make that happen. And when we set out to make these changes, there was actually no one that would buy this, which is a little bit scary because we anticipated this was coming through a bunch of discussions, and now it is available, and we're seeing people moving quickly to this. So the first is the idea that the device itself, the printer itself, needs to speak directly to a public cloud endpoint securely in that zero trust model and request jobs and pull them down from a storage point in the cloud. And so we have built that both from the back-end services required to do that and the MFP component so that those two can communicate in a non-corporate perimeter environment, in a zero trust environment. We talked a little bit about the need for abstracting complexity. So these personalized experience that are consistent across different manufacturers and across the ecosystem is another component. So a user can enroll themselves in SecurePrint very easily, and they can interface with the various devices with a common look and feel, and user experience is very easy and mimics really every other type of single sign-on model. Mobility piece, we added the ability to both release and submit jobs from mobile devices, including Android and iOS devices. And then the back-end architecture, which is probably boring, but is a tremendous amount of effort and investment to build out all of the services that deliver this software experience to customers. And here's just a little bit more about that. So our entire Beacon platform resides in Amazon Web Services, or AWS. And in it, we have a tremendous amount of services that do things like securing devices, confirming authentication, storing jobs, tracking information. All that happens at the cloud level. And then it is providing support for these nodes or endpoints like printers and devices and mobile devices. And it's very fast, it's very secure, it's scalable, it's always on, some of the things that we knew were key components of this. So I would just point out, as we went through this journey, and I have a slide about migration, it doesn't require zero trust or zero infrastructure. So this system will work across a variety of architectures. And we did that because we wanted to make sure that this kind of stone by stone journey, so to speak, for infrastructure was built. So you can have a locally attached MFP, as we call it, or a cloud connected MFP, and you can have different variants of those things. So this is really the architectural diagram, so to speak, on how we're delivering all of those services from a true cloud architecture. And here's this migration that, when we set out with this strategy, and I think we'll see accelerate now, was there is a kind of bell curve around how technology is adopted. And when you look at how technology is adopted as it applies to infrastructure, this kind of late majority is primarily on-prem. The early adopters, early majority, are hosting solutions and kind of virtual infrastructure. And at the time, at least, the idea of moving everything to a true cloud multi-tenanted solution, software as a service, infrastructure as a service, was really in that high technology innovator space. This is really what we're talking about, is accelerating quickly. This idea of kind of getting rid of even virtual infrastructure or hosted solutions and moving to a multi-tenanted public infrastructure. Similarly, for the security track, moving from a perimeter security model to a partial zero trust. So one of the things we certainly saw early on is new builds, for example, organizations that were growing, they would create new builds with zero trust, and then make a plan over a few years to migrate a perimeter security model into a zero trust model. And so we saw and have done installations for zero trust organizations in order to deliver this type of approach. And again, these are the things that you saw in the earlier slides that we hear from the market and studies are showing will accelerate. And then print specifically, we've seen this kind of on-premise print solution as the standard. It still is. However, we see this move to a cloud solution that really delivers print as a service, as we call it, so people can not have to worry about print. It's always available, it's simple to use, and it's delivered from a cloud solution that you don't have to manage or maintain. So I think it's these top three boxes that we kind of focused on pre-COVID-19, in which we see accelerating to address that distributed model, that increased security, and the lack of reducing the amount of IT that needs to be managed, particularly related to print. All right, so that's really kind of a summary of how we see this change and how it aligns with what we believe we should be delivering for you guys and for the market. I think that we've done a lot of internal discussion at Pharos, talking about not just for our Pharos as an organization, how do we make it through these next 12 months, but how do we collaborate with our customers, the market, to make this easier. And I think that as I talked about the B Corp, as we went out and talked to customers, sometimes we think of print as this kind of legacy, old-fashioned thing. It's kind of amazing to hear how important it is in this current world. We've worked with customers, obviously, in healthcare, higher education. We have a customer working on vaccines. So there's a lot going on where print becomes a really integral part of processes still today, and moving that print process into the new world and the infrastructure and security models that are required is what we're going after. And we hope and still believe that, if anything, what we set out to do last year not only is still right, but is accelerating. We're completely open-minded, and we'll be keeping a close eye on it as we go forward. Kind of Touchless is an example where from the idea to the implementation was a matter of weeks. This is an advantage we have in a cloud deployment model. I expect that those types of things will come up over the next 12 months, and we're going to be responding as quickly as possible to those. But the core strategy of having an organization that allows distributed workforce, that reduces the amount of infrastructure that needs to be managed, and increasing security through this zero trust model is likely where we see many organizations going over the next 4 to 48 months. It's going to be a transition we think will happen. So that's kind of it as a summary, and I know that we have some questions, and we're going to get to the questions. I think, Lindsay, would you like to just share some of the other webinars we have coming
I would.
before we do
Thank you, Cal.
questions? Okay.
That would be great. Yeah, so I wanted to share more events we have planned. Coming on May 26th, this is a very special webinar where we will have a panel of business and technology leaders who are going to talk about how their businesses are adapting to our uncertain COVID-19 environment and what they see changing in the future as it relates to print infrastructure and having a more distributed workforce. So you can see in this image here the lineup we have. So this will be an amazing event, and we are thankful to those folks for agreeing to participate. And Cal, if you can actually go to the next slide as well. In June, we have another webinar all about zero trust networks, where we will explore the benefits of a zero trust network and how it protects your data as attacks become more sophisticated, and our vision for a safe and convenient print experience. And lastly, we have 2 virtual seminars, one for higher ed and another for corporate, coming actually next week. These are limited in capacity because these are more interactive events where attendees can show their webcams and speak. So if you are interested in mobile print and touchless printing, we will be sharing the links to those events in our follow-up email to everybody. But I did also in the chat box post a link to our website and the events page where we do keep an up-to-date list of all of our events. So you can go there and see all these events listed there, click the links, and see more of the agendas and other details if you're interested. So now we can move to Q&A, Cal.
All right. Do we have one question?
We've got a couple in here.
Okay, good.
You might not be seeing them all.
I'll take a crack at the first one. Is that all right, Lindsay? And then you can read the others. I do have my my coworkers here to help answer, but one of the questions that I'm seeing is, does this mean that the print job travels through the service model and then back to the output device, which is a really great question. There's actually 2 approaches that you can use in this model. One is exactly what you're describing, which is you print, the job is encrypted and securely sent to cloud storage and is held there until a user authenticates and then is brought back down. The other is to keep it within the environment and send it from locally to the print device so that we don't use up the bandwidth, and also accommodate various requirements for privacy. So in that local model, we essentially keep the job on the user's workstation and route it directly to the device. So those are the 2 models. There is quote cloud storage or local storage as part of that model, and we see customers doing both. I don't know, Lindsay, if you want to. I don't think I'm smart enough to know how to use.
I've got one for you.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Is touchless printing available in Blueprint 5.3 Update 1? And what are the must-have prerequisites to add this functionality?
Good question. And I'm going to, I think Scott Oswald knows that I'm going to ask him to talk to this one.
Yep. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Scott Oswald. I'm the product owner for Pharos Blueprint Enterprise, as well as our embedded platforms on the devices themselves. And we do have touchless printing in Blueprint 5.3 Update 1 today. The obvious choice is through Print Center, which you can access on a mobile device to select jobs and then direct them to an output device. We also have, through the use of a authentication script, the ability to treat the device like a direct output, so that when you swipe your card at the reader, anything that you already have in your print queue is sent out to the device immediately, so that the user can just have to pick up their print jobs from the tray and go on. That's what we have today, and coming soon, we're going to have some additional tools within either the IMFP or the Sentry SE50 platform to do that in a more elegant fashion, give the user a choice with minimal touch to print all or to just engage the device for whatever else they need it for.
Hey, Scott, I was also, it's probably not worth mentioning, but I liked it a lot when you, Scott, had shared some low-tech touchless approaches in the form of a stylus. So we have heard from people who are buying styluses in bulk in order to touch screens and such. So I just thought I would mention that as kind of a clever low-tech, way of interfacing with a device without having to touch it. Thanks, Scott. All right, what else do we have, Lindsay?
Let's see. So there is a question. I'll answer this real quick. That if the session is being recorded, it is, and we will be sharing that link in our follow-up message to everyone after this. Okay, so I am just looking through the others, and I know we have Scott, Jeff, and Ann, and others looking at the questions too. Let's see.
For some reason.
There are, so you answered the one from Josh. There are a couple of questions in here about Uniprint, either going from the on-prem to a zero trust infrastructure, as well as being able to do touchless as well.
I can speak to that.
Yep, go ahead.
So the Uniprint doesn't have a direct path for all of its functionalities to a zero trust environment. That is currently the realm that Beacon holds, and that is not Beacon or Uniprint's realm. Currently, Uniprint would be a premise-based solution, or perhaps a hosted in cloud servers solution that you would manage rather than having them in your data center. So that is one possibility there, but it does not get you to the zero trust. The other question here we've got is there used to be a PS60 Uniprint solution that was touchless and released all print jobs. And does that still exist with SR25? And yes, it does. It is still a possibility. You can come up and tap a card, swipe a card, however you authenticate, and all your print jobs come out. That is still an available solution.
And I would just, Jeff, I was just going to add to that real quick that, there's work ongoing. We have customers that use Uniprint in a hosted model, and we're looking at additional work that would make that easier. And when we talk about Beacon and its relationship both with Uniprint and the higher education market, we have customers using Beacon as a back office secure print and data analytics component. It's a really good fit for that. You can see the print associated with back office versus the print associated with student-facing print. But as I had mentioned, this idea of taking technology and Beacon and extending it to different markets. We are looking at ways to take Beacon more centrally into student print and be able to deliver the same type of model into higher education. So we talked about having different stages in our workflow. So if we look at Blueprint overall, Blueprint and Beacon have a very similar experience at the MFP, and we believe that to switch, for example, between those or use them in combination is going to be switch between them gives a migration path for users. And we think that the similar type of model will apply to a Uniprint in higher education, something that we're working on as well. So. All right, we still got a few minutes, right? I talk fast.
We do have a few minutes, and I see additional questions on here. Some of them I do feel are longer conversations that would be better to set a meeting up. So I'm just looking through here to see which ones we can test you on in these last 5 minutes.
Let's see if I can.
So Cal, here's one on, oh,
No, go ahead.
On QR codes. If other solutions do use QR codes, what differentiates Pharos's process from others, our mobile process from others?
I'll take a crack at that. And Anna Campbell's our product owner for Beacon. It is a fairly straightforward process, the QR code. I think the approach we've taken to job submission is differentiated in many ways in that we're moving towards a driverless print method. And so with our mobile app, you can release a job, but you can also submit jobs and enroll users into that job submission methodology. And so the idea of being able to submit jobs without a lot of effort and a lot of management of the software that's required to make that happen is the direction we're going for our mobile release. The other thing I would say is we are building towards the future. So there's a tremendous amount of other capabilities we'll be building into the mobile app as we go forward. So I think it's primarily around job submission at this point, the scanning of a QR code, and the ability to easily deploy from an administrative console are kind of standard features, but I think that it's the overall story of the mobile app. I don't know, Anna, if you want to add anything to that.
No, Cal, I think you've covered that fantastically.
Okay. And I think just one other point about that, we've certainly looked at ways of leveraging low energy Bluetooth and other types of release features that I think we may end up seeing in the mobile device, but there is an incredible amount of ease and simplicity with the way that we've approached it. And the big thing is there's a huge difference between interfacing with hardware and not. And so one of the reasons we really focused on the approach that we took is around simplicity. It's very, very, very easy to deploy the solution, to enroll in it. And it's also quite easy to open a document that's from Google or Microsoft Suite, select print, secure print, and print directly out to the queue and then release the job from the same mobile app. So a lot of what we were focused on was around simplicity with that workflow. So. All right. Anything else, Lindsay? I'm sure there will be some follow-up questions that we can respond to.
Yeah, I do see a couple here that I think we definitely have answers to, but we don't have more than a minute left in the event to tackle those. So I just want to mention, I said this earlier in the event, that for those who have submitted questions that we haven't answered, we will definitely respond to those and get you answers within our follow-up email when we send out the recording to this. So we are not going to ignore what you've written here, so you will get an answer. And so with that, I did just want to give a special thank you to everyone who joined us today, and to Cal, to you for taking us through all of the content. We will be following up with everyone with a link to the recording and answers to those questions. And if any other questions or comments about what you learned today comes to mind, please don't hesitate to reply to the follow-up message or to reach out to anyone at Pharos, and we will help you get the answers you need. So we hope all of you enjoy the rest of your day. Please stay healthy and safe. Thank you, and hopefully we'll see you at future events soon. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Lindsay.